Cape Town is just a few miles north of the Cape Horn. It's a modern downtown, which could be anywhere, I guess. The Old Town area is a little more quirky, home, we were told, to most of the nightlife and trendy eateries. We found an interesting Japanese seafood restaurant in an upscale mall right on the waterfront and ended up going back there each night. The focal point for the city is Table Mountain. It's on all the postcards. You can see it, usually with a crown of clouds, wherever you are in Cape Town. We were lucky and had a clear day when we took the cableway to the top. A great overview of the city and the waterfront on one side, and down there, on the back side of the mountain, the ocean. The next day, we were down there on one of our trusty hop-on, hop-off bus tours. This tour, by the way, was one of the most beautiful ones we've ever taken. Incredible ocean views with plenty of upscale apartments and condos along the coast roads. Out that way, we hopped off at the Tokai Arboretum. It was originally set up as a test site to try to grow plants and trees not native to South Africa. Obviously, they were very successful. It's a little off the beaten track, and I'm not sure how many tourists make the effort. It looks like we were enjoying ourselves. This walk is in what's called the Tokai Gardens, right in the center of the city, home to a little Jewish museum where we saw a great Nelson Mandela documentary, and the site of what Julie counts as one of her favorite magic moments of the trip.
The children, I think, obviously they're in uniform and were from a school, but they were just totally self-directed. And the thing I liked is I just haven't seen such joyous children. And the fact, I don't know, the boys and girls, they just treated each other equally, and they were just having a great time. I must have watched them for 40 minutes.
From Cape Town, we flew to Nairobi, spent the night, and got picked up the next morning for a 6-hour drive to the first of the safari camps we would visit during our week. Each of them were about 5 or 6 hours apart, which meant we got a very good feel of how the vast majority of Kenyans live. Each of those little shacks in the back is a business. Might be car repair or a blacksmith shop. Used clothes, and if you can't afford one of those little shacks, then you sell on the street. We spent a lot of time in the same Toyota Land Cruiser, a noisy but decent ride on paved roads. But get off the beaten track, this will give you the feel for it. This is our first stop at the Samburu Game Reserve. Pretty typical of the 4 camps where we stayed. Individual tent cabins, nice bathroom and shower, with tent roofs with zipper screens all around to keep out the monkeys. There was usually a pool, which came in handy on the very hot, dry afternoons. And a reception area with a bar and, of course, a restaurant that served pretty good buffet meals, lunch and dinner. We were lucky because some people canceled at the last minute, so we had a driver guide to ourselves, which meant I had my own private camera car. The guy was great at finding animals, and we came across this lion snacking on an antelope on the very first day. Our normal routine was to go out for 2 or 3 hours in the morning, come back for lunch in the heat of the day, and then go back again around 4.
We saw lots of different antelopes. These were impala, and all the females travel with one male, and then there are all these males that have to travel together that don't have any females. So they're constantly challenging the male that's head of the group to be head. we also saw, those were I don't remember their names.
I can't remember either. It's hard to...
They were the biggest of the,
Right.
and this is an odd guy with these long neck and ears. And then we came back from lunch one day, and here was this water buck. First I thought he was a statue. He was so still, but he let me come up and sit down, and he continued to stare. And then, then he went away.
We had a chance for $30, I think, to visit a tribal village. Julie begged off, and when we got there, I wish I had too. Colorful outfits, but very poor people. Close cousins to the Maasai, living in pretty primitive conditions, raising goats and cattle, and then making a few extra bucks, putting on shows for the tourist. Apparently most people like to be a part of the action. I was there by myself. I didn't know how to say no. Julie forced me to include this memorable moment, recorded for comedy relief by my low-res point-and-shoot camera. Enough already, back to the animals. The Cape buffalo is one of the big 5 animals everyone hopes to see on safari.
So Jim looked up why that was, and it turns out the top 5 were for the hunters in Africa to shoot things. So, and this was a huge group of zebra, the largest group we saw, and of course they were attracted to the water. And when they're little, they're brown. If you look, you can tell the young ones because they're brown versus the adults. And there were actually 2 kinds of zebras. I think these are the prettier kind.
No, the other ones had
Thinner stripes, yeah. 2 different kinds that you could see. But zebras, giraffes, and impala were the only things we saw outside of game reserves. In other words, just in the countryside sometimes. And here's our little...
orangutans.
No, they're baboons, aren't they?
Baboons.
Baboons. And they were just every place, along the river banks and sometimes in the road.
And one day, when Julie didn't go out with us in the afternoon, I came upon a tree of
Stork,
storks.
yeah. And these were the beautiful leopards.
No, impala. These are the beautiful cheetahs.
Cheetahs. You can cut that, can't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The first time we saw them, they came up, climbed a tree, and right in front of the camera, wonderful shot. And I realized in 5 minutes that I hadn't touched record on the camera. So thank God the guide found them again. And
yeah.
we were able to follow them.
It's a mother and two juveniles. And and they're sitting on an anthill here.
Watch it.
And this was the largest group of elephants that we saw. I think I counted 20, including the babies. And the babies are just like human children. They're so cute to see that you can't resist them.
And look, their heads look so big compared to their bodies. Those big ears. I mean, this is really kind of the typical Africa scene, isn't it? You know, the brown and the...
And this was a watering hole in front of another place that we went called Sweetwater. And they would just come up and, drink and...
Yeah, they were about probably 5 minutes away from the restaurant, which is overlooked this...
Not about 5 feet.
About 5 feet.
Not 5 minutes.
I love this little guy who came up, and his mom was picking up a stick and sort of chewing on it and stuff. And you could say he sort of...
He tried himself. He's got a twig.
Got a twig and picked it up.
And these were chimpanzees that were actually on we paid to get in, and, they were behind fences. They had a lot of space, but they had all been either in cages since they were little or abused and been rescued, and this was where they live now. And
Was that a Jane Goodall thing?
yeah. Uh-huh.
I love this little bit because it looks just like me trying to get down where you're trying
Trying to get down the bank.
Right.
These are white rhinos. We saw one black rhino, but mostly in this area there were white rhinos. And this was the only time when one of them sort of half charged our car or Land Rover, just briefly, but you got an idea of their power pretty quickly. And this giraffe was actually running from something. We never knew what it was, but he'd look back occasionally. And we saw 3 different kind of giraffes, and if you look at them, you can just see the differences. That first one was different than these 2, and then in a moment, Jim will show a picture where this one has white legs, and that's the 3rd kind that we saw. And we saw a lot of them out in the wild. And the females have 2 horns, and the males have 3.
I didn't remember that.
And that's
they
how you
seem
could
to be able to eat off these really stickly bushes. You know, something about somehow they're able to bite in there among the thorns and get something decent to eat.
These are my fantastic
Cheap binoculars.
right.
And this, I don't think Julie actually was there when
You saw those,
yeah,
right.
really long out of lens, and here's some hippos out of the water. But
But these are right in front of our last place we stayed, which was very similar to the first. So it had the open air place, and you could just sit there and watch the hippos in the river. And they had babies that you'll see in a minute, but they also made noise at night because our tent cabin was very near the river. And all of a sudden you'd hear this whoop in the middle of the night. And you see the little baby swimming right with the mother. And there were 5 or 6 just that you could just sit there and watch as you had your glass of wine. That's a crocodile as opposed to an alligator. And these were the wildebeest, which is why we made our trip at the time we did, because supposedly we were going to see the great wildebeest. They all will get together, and we probably saw 8,000 or 9,000 of them. They get together, and then they make this big trip to the north where the rain is.
yeah, you always see the National Geographic thing where the lions and the crocodiles are eating them, but these had not made their crossover.
Because they had rain, and so they were happy to just keep eating and get a little fatter before they started their run.
And this is really kind of a nice little tender moment among the lions, two young male lions.
After our safari, Julie flew home, and I took up residence for a week in this little thatched shack with a bed, mosquito net, and a solar-powered shower. Worked pretty well, if you remember to put the bag out in the sun every morning. I was there to make a video for Lalmba, a small Colorado-based group that has been serving the poorest and most isolated of the poor in East Africa for 50 years. I visited their outpost in Matoso, a tiny village way off the beaten track, up in the far northernmost corner of Kenya on Lake Victoria. Now they raise cattle and goats, and there's some small-scale farming, but from what I could see, the people make most of their living off of the lake, either in going out each day in these incredibly picturesque boats, look like something out of Egypt, don't they? Or just casting nets off the shore. It's a real communal effort. The nets are put out in the morning, and then the next morning 10 or 20 families come together to bring in their catch. The money crop, as far as I could figure, was tilapia. But they also catch thousands of tiny, kind of sardine-sized fish that are dried out in the sun and either fried or put in soups and stews. Lalmba's brought 21st century medical care with a clinic, pharmacy, and lab, where they provide health and nutrition education and an HIV/AIDS outreach and treatment, and, in the part of the world where malaria is one of the major killers, mosquito nets. They have a microloan program for people who need a little seed money to start their own business. The HIV epidemic hit Matoso hard, leaving hundreds of AIDS orphans. They do run a small orphanage for kids who have no one to care for them. But for foster parents and relatives who are willing to take the somewhere close to 500 orphans into their homes, Lalmba provides food help, medical care, and school supplies and uniform, giving these kids a chance. It's a pretty incredible program.